Nice. All right, folks. Well, we're gonna start this
Thank
out.
you everybody for joining. Yeah,
Go ahead,
thank you
Zach.
everybody for joining us. We've got a really exciting webinar with one of my real heroes in the world of water. Brad's just an incredibly humble but also accomplished person. He's got this wonderful humor and a really amazing ability to be this spokesperson for water harvesting. So as Raleigh just mentioned, we sent out the film ahead of time, a really wonderful film. If you haven't watched it yet, definitely watch it after this. I just dropped it in the chat here. And so we have the creator of that film, David, here with us, and then the man himself, Brad. So I wonder if, for starters, David, you could just share a little bit about, what led you to engage in this project, to create this film, ushering in this new pathway to abundance with water.
Sure. Yeah, basically a few years ago, my partner and I moved to Tucson and bought our first house, and we had a decent sized yard, but it was basically all compacted earth. People had been parking their cars on it and things like that. And there were a couple trees on the property, and that was it. And I had started to learn a lot about the native plants of the Sonoran Desert. And then my partner Laura got Brad's book and gave it to me. And then actually the pandemic started. So we were at home a bunch. And so I just started for fun, kind of looking at this book. I didn't really have any intentions to do anything with it. It was just if you've seen Brad's book, it's fun to read and look at. And then, after a few days, I just kind of was like, I think I can do some of this stuff. And so I got a shovel and a pick and just figured, what did I have to lose? It's not like I was gonna harm anything. Basically, all the water on the property when it would rain would move towards the house and create kind of a moat around the house, and probably erode the foundation. And so I figured I could only do good on this property, no matter how much I mess things up. And and I started creating basins and berms, and luckily we have some amazing native plant nurseries here, and I started learning from them about the plants a little bit more, and buying some plants. And I don't know if I can share my screen.
Yeah, please go for it.
Well, let's see. Okay. Oh, it's asking for some kind of preferences. Here we go. Oh, I don't know if it's going to let me do it. Let's see.
Is it like asking for the window or your desktop?
Here we go. Here we I think I got it. Okay,
cool.
Can you guys see that?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay.
Can everybody else see it?
This is the front yard, circa 2020 in the spring. And this is 1 year later, with a little initial irrigation, but mostly rainwater. And you can't really see very well, but there are basins here. And then here is a year ago. And so, once I saw this transformation, I just thought I knew a lot of people, especially in Tucson and all over the world, knew about Brad's work, but I was like, every single person needs to know about this work and how transformative it is. And so yeah, I approached Brad, and he was luckily willing to work with me on a film. And then we spent like the next 6 to 8 months together shooting on and off, and that's kind of how the film came to be.
Yeah, what a transformation. That's so cool. Can we see the before? Yeah. Gosh, look at that. Yeah, let's look at that between 1 and 3, like literally bare earth, just dirt, to a desert eco oasis. That is so cool.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had even like 6 months, because just between the first year to the second year, the amount of growth, and just like everything's transformed. There are more native bees on the property and birds, and that's just from a few years. So, I mean, to visit Brad's neighborhood and Brad's property, it's the transformation is decades old, and it's incredible to see that.
Yeah. Real quick again, what's the time difference between 1, 2, and 3? They're all a year apart?
Yeah, it's really, this is just 2 years.
Wow.
Now I have to do, obviously this is the Palo Verde tree. blooming, which happens here in the spring. And so this tree's even almost like doubled in size. And so I'll have to take another picture in like a month, and that'll be the 3rd year. So really quite a very short period of time. And I did very little irrigation last year. I still did a little bit, and especially in like June when it's very hot and dry here. But I feel like I'm getting pretty close to no irrigation. And, I was starting from like not knowing about any of these things and never having grown a plant in my life, never having dug a basin or, put in gutters or any of this kind of stuff. So, it's not like I was starting with some amazing foundation of knowledge. Really, almost all of this came from either Brad's book or just the kind of knowledge that locals and nurseries shared with me. But a lot of it was from Brad's book. So
I love that small scale terraforming. That's really amazing, David. Thanks for sharing that.
Actually, David, can you show the before photo one more time? Just pop that up, because there's just one little quick thing I want to say.
Yeah.
Everyone. Okay. All right. So the one thing I just wanted to say is, a lot of times when people see something like this, like, oh, it's bare. It's not. What I want to challenge you all is, do you see the water? You see the water there right now? Because I want you guys to train your eyes to see the water, even when it's not raining. So anytime you see a roof or a paved road or a pathway, anything that's compact from which water runs off when it does rain, that's a water source. So yeah, the yard was pretty bare when David started, but there was this amazing potential always there. And that there was that water hitting the roof and running off the roof. And then what about the water coming out the drains from the sinks, the showers, the bathtub, the washing machine? And then when you put in the air conditioning later, what about the condensate from the air conditioner? So anyhow, look for the water where other people maybe don't see it. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and unfortunately I didn't, for a documentarian, I do kind of a poor job of documenting my own life, my daughters too, and my yard and things like that. I tend to try to be very present with and kind of forget to document a lot of things. But, unfortunately I don't have like the backyard as well documented, which is more where the gray water systems are. And, and I don't have everything up. There's no outdoor shower. That's like a thing that I really want to do, but just kind of slowly getting the confidence and the skill, or meeting people who can do the installations to kind of slowly get all these things online. But it's definitely been like a piecemeal process, and that's a fun way to do it, and to learn from it, and to just kind of get to observe the changes. To me, that's like a huge part of it. And this is something I know Brad talks about, is just like sitting and observing, like when it rains, like where's the water going? Like it's really fun and satisfying. And to me, that's like a huge part of the beauty of doing water harvesting or having a garden, is like, it's just sitting there and looking. And there's so much that you can learn and from that, and so much kind of inspiration that comes from that.
Yeah, it's such an important and key process. I know that's one of the things time and time that we go back to, is just go outside during a rainstorm if you want to understand where the water's going. And I remember early on seeing Brad's videos of him being very excited out there in his swim trunks in a rainstorm, looking at where things are going. And it's just the perfect way to learn from a landscape. And I think this is just such a great testament to the power of Brad's books, to the power of these techniques, that you look at the transformation that someone with no real background in this can make in just 2 years. The proof is in those photos themselves. So I think this is a really good transition to let you take the stage from here, Brad, and take it away.
Okay.
Really an honor to have you here.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Maybe I'll go ahead and I'll share the screen, and I'll do a real quick presentation. Okay, is it up? You guys see this first slide?
Yep, looks great.
Awesome. Okay. So since the focus of today is more the documentary, than the presentation. I'm making sure the presentation is shorter than the documentary. So, but I just want to give a few more basics that are in the film, that are in my books, and but just kind of reiterate with some additional slides. So what you're seeing here in this image is how we can increase the amount of available rainfall. So we cannot change how much rain is falling from the sky. Okay, that's out of our control. But once the rain hits the surface, well, we can do a lot. So what I want to show is on the left, just by creating a water harvesting basin, a topography that will hold or rather retain rather than drain the rain, we're much better off than we were before, because now you're going to capture 100% of the rain that's falling on that area from the sky. Whereas if it were flat or mounded, you'd be losing a good bit of that water. So this makes the most of what you've got. But then we can go further. Now, if you direct runoff from an adjoining surface, like you see in the middle, they're directing runoff from a section of roof that's about the same surface area as the rain garden basin. By doing that, you can double your available rainfall, because you're capturing all the rain that falls within the basin, plus you've got another surface of the same surface area draining into it. And then the third is, okay, well, now we've got the roof on the right, and we've got the ground on the left, all sloping towards that rain garden basin in the middle. And thereby we have tripled the amount of available rainfall in that rain garden space. Super simple. I hope this is obvious to you all, or if not, it's becoming obvious. Because this is basically the essence of most of what I do. And the great thing about having these basin shapes, they don't just capture water, they capture everything that moves with gravity, including leaf drop, manure from the birds hanging out in the trees and the bushes and so forth. So this is a great way to not only capture water, but to capture organic matter, which then becomes part of the sponge that absorbs that water, so it's not sitting on the surface creating a puddle in which mosquitoes can breed. Rather, our goal is to create a living sponge into which we can rapidly absorb that water, so we lose less to evaporation than we would if it were pooling on the surface. And that way we do not contribute to mosquitoes. In fact, we help control mosquitoes because we're lessening the amount of surface water on the surface. Okay, so you know you're on the right track when you're trying to do something good, and then you not only do that, but all these unanticipated goods start to happen. Okay, in this case, another good is the capture of that organic matter. Okay, so nothing that I'm going to talk about, nothing that's in my books, nothing that's in the movie, any of that is new. This stuff is been practiced all over the world for thousands and thousands of years. So anywhere in the world where you have a dry season or you experience drought, there is a tradition of water harvesting. It might be forgotten because we forgot much of this when we got mechanical pumps to move water distances. But prior to that, there were water harvesting traditions everywhere in the world where there was a dry season or drought. Okay, so what we're seeing here in the upper left is an image of a photo I took from the Icarta research farm outside. It used to be outside Aleppo, Syria. Unfortunately, it's not there any longer. So due to all the fighting that occurred. But what you can see here is they set up a farm in an area that gets 12 inches of rain a year. And they wanted to maximize the available rainfall. So what you're seeing there, the yellowish vegetation, we've got garbanzo beans and lentils being grown on contour. So they plowed and planted on contour. So, and then the blue arrows are showing the water flow. Now, what's different about typical contour plowing is here, they planted the contour strip, and then up slope of it, they had an area that they did not plant. And that was meant as their catchment area for the crop. Just like the previous slide where I showed you a roof and, the landscape here, it's just a section of the field that's unplanted. So they were able to triple the amount of available rainfall for the crop in the lower right of the corner there. Okay, super simple, just a different context. Okay, then in the lower right, that's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Friend and colleague Jeremiah Kidd of San Isidro Permaculture, he set this up. So he has a septic tank getting his toilet water, and then he directs the septic tank water, the poop juice, into subsurface contour drains, and on top of which he planted these native grasses. So he created a contour belt of grass. Instead of creating an earthen berm, he grew a grass berm. I think that's way better than an earth berm, okay? Because it's alive, okay? An earth berm will erode, whereas a grass berm can keep getting better because it builds on itself. So as water comes from the right upslope and hits that contour line of grass, the grass is like a living comb that slows down the flow of water, more infiltrates, and then that infiltrated water migrates down slope, and then the seed from the grass is able to germinate in that moisture plume migrating down slope. And it just keeps building on itself. As the organic matter accumulates, that's more of a sponge to capture and hold on to the moisture longer. Okay, so that's same concept I've been talking about the whole time here, just different context. All right. Now this is my brother and I's place, before and after photos. You're seeing the public right-of-way, that in the upper photo, the barren area between fence and street. And when we bought the property, the water would flow from the public right-of-way into the street. That's not cool. So we reversed that and directed the water from the street into the public right-of-way, which is what you see in the bottom. We did that by beginning with existing infrastructure, where in the lower right corner of the lower image, there is a dip in the street curb where there had once been a driveway. So we used that existing dip in the curb to direct water into an eddy basin. And worked great. When we saw how well that worked, we decided to start cutting the street curb on Sunday when no one from the city was watching, because that strategy was not yet legal. Some might call it illegal, but I would call it pre-legal, because it was a law that needed to be changed and now has been through our example. So now it's not only legalized, but it's incentivized with $2,000 rebates and mandated in new road construction and major road renovation, all inspired by this guerrilla pilot project. Okay. And it's made, if you see the lower image, much walkable, bikeable community. And we, of course, selected plants that produce food. We 95% of the species are native to the Tucson Basin, so they're the best adapted to our climate, wildlife, and soils. So it's very easy to succeed. And then we look to the ethnobotanical record to see what plants were historically used for food, medicine, craft material, and so forth. We prioritized those plants. So we were growing a living pantry, a living orchard, a living pharmacy, and more. Okay. But the key thing to make all that work is we planted the rain before we planted any plants. So when we started, we're only doing 3-foot diameter, 6-inch deep basins capturing direct rainfall. Kind of like the first image I showed you that was on the left. But we soon realized, oh, we're missing the boat. There's way more water that we could capture. There was a lot of water would flow down the street, as you saw in the film and maybe see here. So we started to cut the curb and do curb cores, as you see in the lower right. We now do curb cores more than curb cuts because they're cheaper, quicker, and easier. So it's a 4-inch diameter hole in the curb that you see in the lower right image. Whereas the upper left, that's a dip in the curb where there once had been a driveway. We pulled the basin to the to the dip on both sides. That worked great. And then we this lower left image, excuse me, is eddy basins. The water's flowing from right to left. So we put the curb cut or curb core on the upslope side, fills up. Once the water fills up, it backs up on itself. And until more water infiltrates, the surplus goes to the next basin. So it's self-controlling. You don't lose mulch, you gain mulch because there's not water flowing through. Okay. And then the upper right image is an in-street basin. It's a traffic calming chicane or curb extension. So try and get my cursor going there. The cursor disappeared. Oh. There it is. Okay. So pulled the curb out to narrow the street, slow down traffic, protect on-street parking, and then depress this 2 feet to capture the water. And then once the water goes in, the surplus goes out the other end. So that's a flow-through basin, not an eddy basin, because water does flow through. Okay. All right. Then in our basins, we create 3 distinct microclimates. We've got the bottom planting zone for the highest water needy and water tolerant plants, also the most cold tolerant plants, because cold air goes to the bottom just like water. And then we have the terrace, which is higher than the bottom. So we have lower water use and water needy plants there. And then we have the top. So the least water needy, least water tolerant plants there, and the least cold tolerant plants there as well. By doing this, this also helps when you work with the city of Tucson. The city of Tucson requires a railing along a public path if you have more than a 13-inch drop. So by having these stepped drops, you don't need any railing. Okay. It also makes it easier to get in and out of the basin to maintain it, and it enables you to plant a greater diversity of species. In my book, the Volume 1 book, and also on my website, I list plants by their rain garden planting zone, if it's a bottom terrace or top. And we've worked with a local nursery, Spadefoot Nursery. They do the same thing with their plants, because we want to make it really easy for people that are maybe really into water harvesting, but they don't know their plants that well yet. Most people, when they go to a plant nursery, they know they want a plant with a red flower, not that much more. So this way they can go to the nursery and say, hey, I want a plant with a red flower that works really well on the bottom of my rain garden. And then the nursery says, oh, well, that's all these over here. And they say, I want one that's good on the terrace. Well, then you over in this section. So you got to make it more convenient for people to do the right thing. Okay. Now this shows you 2 different scenarios. The one on the left is where street runoff is being harvested in a rain garden that has been mulched with gravel and rock, predominantly gravel. I do not recommend that, okay, because the rock is not really helping your soil. What I recommend is on the right. That is where it's mulched with organic matter, the leaf drop and cut up prunings. So it's organic matter. So why do I advocate that rather than the gravel? Well, Mitch Pavo-Zuckerman did a study, which I link, you can see on the bottom if you want to look it up, where he compared 2 street side water harvesting basins. One mulched with rock and gravel, the other one mulched with organic matter. He found the one with mulched with organic matter had twice as much soil moisture as the one that was mulched with rock and gravel, despite the fact that the one that was mulched with organic matter had a smaller water catchment area. So it should have been drier, but it had twice as much soil moisture. Okay, because that organic matter is food for the soil life, which helps burrow into the soil and makes for a much more rapidly infiltrating soil. And that organic matter also holds on to the moisture much longer into the dry season. And even better still, that organic matter is habitat for mycorrhizal fungi that colonate the organic matter, and then their hyphae, hair-like roots, fuse in with the roots of the photosynthesizing plants, thereby expanding the surface area of the plant's roots by up to 100 times or more. You don't get that without that organic matter. Okay, I bet a lot of you, if not all of you, know a lot of this stuff already, so sorry if this is repeat, but the other thing I find useful, even if you're hearing stuff you already know, is maybe it's being said a different way. So maybe someone that's got a different learning style than you, maybe you can share it with them that way and it might click. Okay, all right. So on the upper left, this is what it was before we started, when we started digging our rain gardens, when we started to plant the rain. Very little organic matter and life in the soil. And we created the basin, which you see in number 2, and mulched it with the organic matter, and then lower right. Then we've got this amazing soil. And we didn't buy anything. It was all just using what was freely on site. Okay. Okay, and then this one is showing you how you can go even further with this mulching. So here in the lower left is my nephew standing on the bottom of a street runoff harvesting eddy basin, a rain garden. And there I would have liked to have made the basin wider, but I couldn't because there's neighbor's driveway here. And on the other side, we had to have a pathway coming to the main pathway. And here we had the main pathway on top of underground utilities. So we couldn't make it any wider. But yet we had all this water coming off the road. How do we capture more of that? So what we did is we dug down an additional 2 feet and packed it full of coarse prunings from the neighborhood street trees. And that coarse prunings in that 2-foot deep pit, they can take your full body weight. So there's no drowning threats or anything like that, but it quickly infiltrates with water. So we've got more water holding capacity, and all that organic matter is just amazing feed for the life in the soil. Okay, now in a different context, how might you harvest water off a dirt road? So this is not what you want to do here. So here they had a drain to drain water off the road, but you can see there's still a lot of water flowing down the wheel ruts of the dirt road. So typically in the rural setting, or anywhere you got a dirt road or dirt driveway, that's one of the highest areas of maintenance needs because there's no vegetation stabilizing the road. So I want to show what one of my mentors, Bill Zedike, taught me is a rolling dip. So it has a drain to drain the road, but it's much wider than the one I showed you before. This one is channelizing the flow of water. So the water is cutting. Anytime you increase the speed, depth, or volume of flowing water, you increase its ability to carry things like sediment and be more erosive. Anytime you decrease the speed, the depth, or the volume, you decrease the water flow's ability to carry sediment, and instead you start having sediment drop out. So that's what happens here. It's as wide as the tractor that dug it out. The ditch, when that was dug out, created much of the dirt to create the berm. So there's a dip at an angle to the road, so water flows off into the ditch, and then the berm ensures no water can flow down wheel ruts. And so, okay, that's hopefully common sense, but here's the thing that few people consider. Bill Zedike has a series of principles when he does this, when he places these in the landscape. The first is you want to drain the rain off your dirt roads your first chance. Okay, so you stop the road from eroding in the first place. But even better is you really want to divert the water off the road at your best chance. What does that mean? That means you want to direct the water off the dirt road where it can get maximum spread in the landscape, least potential for erosion and problems, maximum potential for rehydration. So it's first chance, then best chance, and then you got to do your last chance. Your last chance is the last spot you can drain water off the road before it goes into a gully or there's no way of draining it. And you got to do that last chance before you hit the spot where there's no chance. Okay. So this is the result of that previous slide. Waist-high native grasses in southwestern Arizona. For some of you in wetter areas, that may not thrill you, but that's amazing here to have that kind of response. And that's simply from redirecting water from where it's a problem to where it's a resource and can get maximum spread and infiltration. You can check out a book by Bill Zedike, search Water Harvesting from Low Standard Dirt Roads. It's a free downloadable PDF you can get online. And I also include a lot of info on how to do this in my volume 2 book. Make sure you get the full color edition. The black and white editions do not have this. And if you have the black and white edition, I highly recommend you invest in the color editions, because I've dramatically revised and expanded the full color editions, and I've removed stuff from the black and white editions that I can no longer stand behind from experience and learning. Okay, and to wrap this up, I also have 8 water harvesting principles. Feel free to add to them, but one of them is you always want to plan an overflow and use that overflow as a resource. All too often I find people put in, say, a rainwater tank, and they overflow the tank to the base of the tank, and then it erodes under the tank. That's no resource. You've got all this elevation of your roof and the gutter. And so use elevation more, use the free power of gravity. So I like to have tall tanks, not low squat tanks, because I want the water to be stored higher. So I've got more pressure to be able to direct it to more areas below. I also like to keep my overflow pipe as high in the landscape as possible before I outlet it, so that I can water more areas below with gravity. So here we're directing the overflow to a rain garden basin, which overflows to a diversion swale, which spills into another rain garden, and then into a contour swale, which overflows into another rain garden. So we're zigzagging that flow. So whenever you're harvesting your rain, typically you want to slow spread and sink the flow of water. All right, which this is trying to express. And by doing so, we can turn the upper left image into the upper right image. In the upper left, that's draining water. In the lower right, we're retaining water. And doing it with living strategies that help to recharge the groundwater, which recharges the rivers and the creeks, and thereby providing more water, not only for ourselves, but for everyone within the watershed and planet, because you got to think of the larger water cycle. Okay, and which gets to this. So I think we should be taking our inspiration and many of our teachings from the planet's hydrologic cycle. So this planet has a finite amount of fresh water, yet the planet never runs out of fresh water because of these bazillion life forms that have all evolved to cycle that water multiple times in such a way that the quality of the water is not degraded, but at least maintained, or even better, enhanced. So with a finite amount of water, it becomes infinite because of the way we're cycling it and reusing it again and again and again in a way that maintains or increases the quality of that water. So we should be striving to do the same thing. Ideally, not with mechanical and chemical systems that consume resources, but rather with living systems that generate resources and more resilience. So here, rain falling on the building, capture that water off the roof into a tank, can use inside or for a shower. And then once we shower with that water, we direct that into a rain garden to naturally filter and utilize that water. It goes into these living pumps that turn it into food, habitat, shelter, cooling, and much more. And then the beneficial bacteria in the released from the stomata of the leaves is the ideal cloud seed. So that carries up into the higher part of the atmosphere. Moisture, atmospheric moisture condenses around that. We get more rain clouds, more rain. Ah, beautiful cycle. That is very simplified. There's many other ways of cycling it, but that's what we're trying to collaborate with. And last slide here is, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Walter Jenny's work and others. He's a climatologist and soil scientist from Australia, where he oftentimes talks about how 95% of our planet's thermoregulation is through the hydrologic cycle. So we can collaborate with that in the soil carbon sponge, which I'm trying to illustrate in the right-hand side of the image. On the left-hand side is what we don't want, where we remove vegetation. So the incoming energy of the sun hits the exposed soil, heats that soil up, is reflected up, and then due to the dust and other pollution, we get a haze. So it kind of acts like a window in a greenhouse, so that heat just keeps reflecting back and forth. And it just gets worse. Whereas on the right, what we're trying to do is when we got that incoming radiation and from the sun, it's immediately mellowed by the transpiring vegetation and the shading vegetation. And then we have a rain garden harvesting the water. So we have more soil moisture. And so when we have this incoming heat energy, it transforms liquid water into a vapor through evaporation and evapotranspiration, and that consumes a lot of that energy, and then it rises with evaporation to a higher part of the atmosphere where that heat can be released back out into space as opposed to just sticking around on the planet. It also helps form more clouds along with the stomata from the vegetation, the beneficial bacteria from the stomata of the leaves, which then reflects more of that incoming heat and generates more rain to recharge the system. Okay, I think you guys get it all. So on the left, bad. On the right, really good. So how can we collaborate with that really good? So as Walter says, you can start right outside in your landscape. You can create a retaining rather than a draining landscape. You can add, help that organic matter accumulate so you create more life that can hold on to that moisture longer and cycle more of that moisture into the local and the planetary system. Way more information on all of this in my books, which I can't recommend enough. So, and I highly recommend you guys buy them direct from me at my website, harvestingrainwater.com, because they're all available at deep discount on my website. There's no middle person taking a cut, no corporations taking a cut. So I can put more of the resources back into generating more books, and also check out my website for tons of free information on how to harvest many different kinds of water in many different contexts. Today, I was primarily focusing on how to harvest water off paved and dirt roads, but there are so many other ways I cover in my books in rural and urban settings and everything in between. And also check out neighborhoodforesters.org for how we are doing a lot of this on a neighborhood scale in a way that is influencing the changing of city and state policy. Yeah, you can start right outside the door. Also on the right, you can see working on the Spanish edition. It's now fully translated. It's now 95% laid out. We're just going through the final edits. So I hope to have the Spanish edition available soon. It will be available in ebook format. So we avoid printing costs and shipping costs for folks much further from me than those in Mexico and beyond, and those everyone just living here, even my neighbors. Okay. All right. So yeah, thanks for watching that little thing.
Awesome, Brad. That was epic. Thank you so much. I think
fantastic presentation. You have such a good way of explaining these things in a way that's simple, that's fun, and I really admire and respect that you're not just a visionary and a leader, but you're also a poet with your words, which is something I just find takes all your work to the next level. I really appreciate.
Well, it takes a community of poets. So it's a community that cross-pollinates with stuff. Retain, don't drain the rain. Thank Brock Dahlman for that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the
Awesome.
Brock too. Well, folks, we're gonna get the Q&A like right now. That's the one quick thing I want to say about Brad. What's so inspiring is even we think about how do we impact the climate? How do we impact our water cycle? And a lot of people get overwhelmed, like, well, I don't have a digger, I don't have a pond, I don't have land. You can do this right now. And when your neighbors see you and they're inspired, this can scale up. So even if you have no land, even if all you have is 50 square feet, you can do this. And you don't even need land. You could do this in your neighborhood. So this is one of the, it eliminates any excuses that someone can't do anything. It shows everyone that you can have an impact, and which is, I think, is so remarkable when people get frightened by the scale of not being able to do anything.
And if you're a renter, if you don't own property or land, hats off to you. And you can go to my website, harvestingrainwater.com, and in the search bar, type in renter or renters. And I've got a section of tips of what you can do as a renter, and also the neighborhoodforesters.org. The vast majority of the work we do is in the public right of way. It's in the public commons. It's on public land. So it doesn't matter if you own land or not. The public land is it's for all of us, all life. So that's where we emphasize our work, so everyone can participate and enjoy it, regardless of what they own or financial standing.
Fantastic. That's so very needed. So I've got a few questions, Brad, that I just wanted to dig deeper with you. And then, as Raleigh mentioned, we're going to open it up to question and answers. So while we're going through this last little bit, feel free to ask your questions in the question and answer feature, folks. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question with your voice. But one of the things I think is just so inspiring about your work, Brad, is the whole pre-legal concept about how sometimes these very logical, simple techniques that should be implemented are not yet legal. And I know this is something that people around the world are really struggling and challenging with, or challenged by. I wonder, what recommendations do you have for as people try and undergo that process of taking work that is pre-legal and moving it into a legal standing?
Yeah, so look for other examples where it is thriving, whether it's legal or not. Okay, so you can direct people to that, because people won't believe your words typically. I think it's a great practice not to trust people's words. To be critically thinking, challenge everything. Okay, so I think working examples speak volumes. So as you can read in my books, the volume 1 book, Mr. Zephaniah Piri Maseko, a subsistence farmer in Africa, he in the rural Zimbabwe, he was one of my primary mentors, and he enabled me to see what was possible. But at the same time, what influenced and informed our pre-legal work of this street runoff harvesting was also, as you saw in the film, Clifford Pablo, who is Tona Autumn, and he learned to harvest runoff from arroyos from his grandfather. We just tweaked what he taught us to a slightly different context of a street as opposed to an unpaved arroyo. And also we look to the cities of Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, because they were doing street runoff harvesting before we did. There it was the city that initiated that work, and a different driver. It wasn't drought, it was pollution of the Puget Sound from urban runoff. That's what their driver was. And in Portland, Oregon, it was they sent all the water off the streets into storm drains, and the storm drains connected with the sewer. So when there was a big rain event, there was too much water going in the sewer pipe. There was stormwater and sewage. So everything backed up and turds started floating up into people's basement drains and floating into the street, which is truly heinous. But it's also awesome because nothing drives political will like a brown trout floating up into your basement drain or floating onto your street. So everyone called up mayor and council and said, I don't care what it takes, get this turd off my street. And so they looked to putting in a bigger pipe to take more turds and shoot it to the river. You know, so it's not kicking the can down the street. It's rifling the turds down to the river. So thankfully, before they implemented that, they had a change of thinking. And they said, hey, what if we use this as a resource? What if we infiltrated more of the rain, use this for irrigation, grow more shade over our streets and so forth, and rain gardens? So they did that. And they prioritized this work in neighborhoods with the highest turd to basement drain ratio. You know, neighborhoods that used to have the name nickname is Stinkville or whatnot, or Turdville, now they're known as, you know, these rain garden oasis neighborhoods. You know, turn the problem into solution there. Going on that turd story, I totally lost for how I got into that originally. So we were also inspired by the cities of Portland and Seattle. So when we took our example, our local example, to the city of Tucson, and we said, hey, look, you can see it works in this context, it works in this climate. But look at these cities did it too. So if you're worried about liability issues and stuff, they've figured that out. It has not been a problem for them. So it dropped the fear threshold and they are much more receptive. And the other key thing is, when we talked to the city, when we had our initial meetings, we said, we asked them, what are the issues you have along neighborhood streets? Rather than just pushing, hey, legalize this. We said, what are the issues? They said, well, we have excessive crime, we have excessive litter, we have potholes, we have flooding, we have heat-related illnesses along neighborhood streets. And I'm like, okay, well, we think we can help you with all of that. And because if we pull water off the street, that's going to reduce flooding. If we use that water to grow trees that shade and cool the street, that's going to reduce the vaporization of the asphalt and thereby reduce the cracking of the asphalt and the potholes. If we, along with water, the litter will also come into these rain gardens. So it's all in one, you know, spot. It's easier to pick up. And we've got people planting and caring for this. So there's more people that are more likely to pick up that litter, and more people getting to know one another. So there's more friendly eyes on the street, which drops crime as well. So the key is to get out of your agenda and try and understand the agenda and the needs and the potential of others that you're working with, so that it's more of a collaboration, not a transaction of, I'll give you this for that. It's like, no, how do we lift the capacity of all for the benefit of all life?
Nice.
That is such wise advice, and one of the funniest stories I've ever heard too.
Yeah,
Thanks
I
for
like
sharing
that.
all of that.
I like that rifling. It's pretty great.
I got just a couple more questions for you here, Brad, and then we'll open, Raleigh, if you have any as well, and then we'll open it to the audience. But you know, you're someone that clearly has learned from a lot of different people, and I'm just so curious about what your path into this was like. Did you know you wanted to do water work before visiting Zephaniah, or was that the way the door opened? If you're open to sharing, I'd love to hear more about your own personal journey to get where you are.
So I grew up in Tucson, saw the water situation get worse over time, didn't want to contribute to the problem, rather wanted to be a positive force. And I took a permaculture class trying to find better solutions. I liked that it was solution oriented as opposed to articulating the problem. And but I found in my permaculture course, it left me with more questions than answers. So I challenged the organizers. I said, hey, look, I took this course in part because I wanted to learn how to better manage water, and I don't feel I got enough. And they said, well, why don't you teach it? So like, whoa. So that was a crazy challenge at the time, but it was great because I don't know, I guess I was ready for it. So I wanted to step up to that. So I had to really up my game on learning through self-study and whatnot and experimentation. And it was in that time that I had the opportunity. My mom's from South Africa, so but she left when she was in her early 20s, and but we went back for a family reunion. My dad's from Kentucky, went back for a reunion, and I took the opportunity to travel around after hearing from friends who had hosted some permaculturalists from Botswana. And so I went to stay with them and learn from them. And I heard about Mr. Peary when I was staying with them. And then, found Mr. Peary. And he was so much better than the permaculture course, because it's like, whoa, you can really do this. And he and his family, they taught themselves how to do it all. I mean, he was literally in chains when he started, as the movie shows too, because he was under house arrest for being politically active, trying to get democratic reform in Rhodesia, which is what Zimbabwe used to be called, when it was led by an all-white minority government and was not a democracy. So being politically active, he was blacklisted and told that he would never work again in any capacity. So he had to figure out how to support his family on this eroding landholding. So, and that can sound harsh, and yes, it is. But thing that blew me away when I went back to see Mr. Peary, just before he passed away, there was a big celebration for him. And all these people that had been inspired by his work came to see him again. And he gave this very passionate speech where he thanked his jailer, which I couldn't believe he was doing. And he said, look, had I not been constrained in these conditions where I had to get creative, I probably would not be speaking or know any of you that are here. So he found his vocation, his calling in this work. Now, we should not imprison anyone to get to this point, but I would challenge you all to self-impose limitations which are actually leverage bars. And that's what I've done for myself. So I don't think I ever would have written these books had I not met Mr. Peary and Clifford Pablo and other mentors, but nor would I have written these books had I not self-imposed a limitation, or rather a leverage bar. So my self-imposed leverage bar was, I cannot use groundwater or surface water and our dry climate. I cannot contribute to the dwindling water resources. I have to instead figure out, how can I create a system that doesn't just survive but thrives just on free on-site waters, the rain that falls from the sky and the runoff from surfaces here. And so by forcing myself into that, I had immense learning. And it was challenging because that's not what the majority of the people wanted to hear or do. Like, I was digging a rain garden on the side of the street, and a guy came by. He's like, "What you doing, man?" So I'm digging a basin to collect the water off the street. He goes, "Oh man, it never rains." I go, "Well, it does, just not that often. And so I'm going to be ready for when it does rain." And he's like, "Stupid, man. You just put in a plastic pipe." And I said, "Well, I could do that, but where's the water coming from in the plastic pipe? And what if that runs out? Because it is running out." And he said, "I'm going to capture the free stuff, and there's no plastic, no waste. I'm going to reduce flooding at the same time." And he just wandered off, muttering under his breath, "Freak." And I was there still digging, muttering under my breath, "Man." So but it's paid off in the long run. So yeah, just to recap, If there's change you want to see in the world, be part of that change. And if it means challenges and difficulties, dive into it. That's a great learning opportunity. And I then went a next step, and it's like, okay, I figured out how to do this for the landscape. How can I live off rainwater? So I wanted to see if I could live entirely off the rainwater harvested off my roof for all my domestic use, my drinking, bathing, cooking. So I'd say I'm at 95%. And had I not forced myself into that, so there's no plumbing. Well, for years there was no plumbing on my house. I did change that when I was out of the country working, and a neighbor took care of my site, and he accidentally turned on the cistern to water the plants and left it on and drained everything. So I put in a backup just in case. But yeah, 95% of my water comes from just the rain that falls from the sky. And had I not forced myself into living with that, I wouldn't have the learning and the knowledge that I do now. And it works great. Tastes so much better than the city water. It's higher quality. I'm healthier. The plants are healthier. It's fun. I do get a little dance every time it rains. I never get excited about turning on a city faucet. That does not excite me. Kind of depresses me. But to turn the faucet on my rainwater tank, that juices me every time.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's such a great way to go about things. And I know in our searching through water stories of finding the best examples around the world, it's always from situations of challenge. And necessity is the mother of invention. And if we're, in a situation that's good enough to not have major challenges that we have to address, I love that concept of imposing some challenges on ourselves, so that we can move these things forward, so that we can innovate. That's really just wonderful advice.
So I just want to add one other thing to that. The challenges are here before us with climate change and with all the disruptions people are experiencing with drought, or excessive flooding and stuff. But the majority of the resources I see being spent are not to address those issues. They are how to ignore it and deflect it. So, we're rebuilding in the floodplain after a flood. We learn nothing. We're trying to spend money on huge water infrastructure projects that bring in ever more water from elsewhere, so we can continue to mismanage the water that's already here, free at hand. So we need massive cultural change to where we step up to the reality of the world in which we live, and we stop trying to live outside the natural bounds and leverage bars of the environment and the planet in which we live. I also just want to say, I want to shift to David, because kudos to David Fenster that made this film, because, okay, I've got a way that I say this stuff and that I teach this stuff and that I write this stuff, but it doesn't work for everybody. So we need to be able to say, teach, convey messages in multiple ways for different learning styles. And so I'm super grateful for David having done this film, because I think it makes the information and the ideas much more acceptable, alluring, and whatnot for some that would not maybe find me, talking them to direct, or and it also gets to people through channels that I wouldn't otherwise be able to get them to. So we need to create the media that we need in the world with the positive changes and potential. And so, David, I want you to speak to that. And my neighbor's trying to text me so he can sign a petition for more water harvesting traffic calming in the neighborhood. So I just got to answer him via text.
Very cool. Well, yeah, David, I want to ask you, I'd love to, and again, I'm posting a link to the film to everyone, this is a beautiful half-an-hour film about David's work. It's like David spent years working with Brad to make this. So it's a beautiful summarization of all of Brad's philosophies and his work. David, what has the response been to this film?
Yeah, thank you all for saying all that stuff about the film. Films in general, just like before I talk about the response, I think, it's like a different medium than Brad's book or what you all are doing with this online community. I think like every medium's so valid and necessary. I guess for me, film is like a good overview. I mean, it only takes half an hour to watch the film. It takes a lot longer to like read a book or, more engagement to be part of a community. So a film can be kind of a shallower experience in some ways, but also I always feel like it's like a good entryway into a subject, or it's good to maybe pique someone's interest and inspire them. So my hope is that people like watch the movie and then they get Brad's book, or they join your community, or that it's basically like the first of many steps. And so hopefully it does that. It gets people engaged and interested. But yeah, the response has been great. I mean, a little context, the film, I work for a PBS station in Tucson, and so that's kind of how I made the film. So it did air, God, what was it, in I want to say May of 2022. So pretty recently it aired on television in Arizona, and it was released online at the same time. And yeah, I mean, so far the response has been great. We've done a lot of amazing screenings within our Tucson community. So even here, there's a lot of people that still kind of aren't as aware of some of this information. We just had one that Brad and I were at a few weeks ago at a big botanical garden here, and there were several hundred people that came. And there's nothing, I mean, these Zoom events are amazing too, but there isn't anything I feel quite like these in-person community screenings. And we'd love to do more of those in different places, or and then actually we were invited also to basically like a water conservation event in California, and called Localizing California Waters. And so I went out to that. It was near Yosemite, and got to meet a lot of people that ended up connecting me to water stories. And so I feel like there's kind of this amazing thing that's happened as we've gone out in person and shown the film, and that's connected to other people online or in person. And so it does have this kind of rhizomatic thing that happens when you release a film. And luckily that's happening. People are interested. And people are definitely, if you're inspired by this, like anybody, you can watch the video on YouTube for free. Just share the link. I think we're at like 10,000 views, which is awesome. But it'd be amazing to see 100,000, 1 million, just to see people spreading this around. But the response so far has been great, and I do feel like it's just kind of getting started, and there are other avenues that we've talked about that we haven't even really gone into, like film festivals or different types of screenings and events. And it's been awesome. I've just had people reach out from like city governments and from all over the world, and talking about how they're hopefully this will be like a tool for them that they can use to get conversations started, or to convince governments that that this kind of work's important and it's not as difficult as it might seem, and and all those kind of things. So.
Well, I think the film really beautifully illustrates to anyone in a suburb, in a city, who's asking the question, what do I do? Like, bam, look at that. Then everyone can get on board to be like, oh, we can all do this. It could be like rainwater gardens near train tracks, on the city street, near buildings. It's like there are no excuses. Everywhere in a city could do this, and it could scale up so fast.
Yeah,
So
and the only thing that I wish, it wasn't in the scope of what we were doing with the film, but if we did like a longer version, or a version that had other voices other than Brad's or something, a lot of people, and I've seen it in the in the chat, like people want to know, this is very kind of desert centric or Tucson centric. Can you do this in other places? And, the answer is definitely yes. You can basically do it everywhere. So, I would love to have a film that showed people doing this all over the world, and in different climates, in wetter climates and things like that. But, Brad could speak more to how you do it in different places, but that's something I would love to illustrate. Like, you can do this anywhere, basically.
Nice. Well, let's say we open it up now. Zach, what were you about to say?
Yeah, just to, kind of drive home that point, this film is so applicable for so many people. And while it's great that it's got 10,000 views, I want to see it with 100,000 views, with 1,000,000 views. So everyone here on this webinar, you all are into this, you all are loving what we're sharing. Share the film, share it every day, share it, put together a community screening in your local area. Let's get it to the point where this is just totally common knowledge so that people really understand what's possible, and now they can choose. Do we want to live in a world of abundance and beauty, or do we want to keep going down the watershed death spiral into, the tragic and catastrophic direction that we're currently headed? So I got just one last question for you here, Brad, and then we'll open it up to everyone's other comments. If I could just wave my wand and make you water czar of the Colorado River Basin, and you were tasked with how do we restore or heal this situation? Can you give us some thoughts or ideas of what that might look like, where you would start, and what you would ask people to do?
Yeah, I'd start by asking everyone to be the water czar, because one person's not gonna do this. Everyone's got to step up in the way that is appropriate for them and that suits their unique needs, abilities and whatnot. So we all need to be stewards of our homes, our communities, and we need to be collaborating with each other. So it's I think if in a water czar role I could do anything, maybe the best thing would be to inspire, not to direct, but inspire. And I think we all have that ability to inspire by leading through our own life example, because there's no place of greater power than the top of your watershed of influence, which is your life. And so I think we should all be striving there. I'll just share a story that I used to have quite a reputation as a hothead that would show up to many meetings and go off on how things should be changed, and that helped nothing. I'd come into the room and people would start tensing up, and they're like, "Oh God, here's that angry guy," and I got angry and I couldn't sleep after those meetings. So but when I started to, okay, well, rather than asking others to change, why don't I ask myself? And why don't I make change in my own life and let that change speak? That shifted the whole vibe. So, and everyone's going to have a different path on that. But you just start trying stuff, and you think critically. And I'm pretty ruthless on myself in that I don't have anything figured out. I'm just on a path. If I think I've got it figured out, I think I've failed, because then I'm not striving to evolve anymore. I'm not striving to learn. I'm not striving to go further. So I think it's essential that we stay in that state of ever wanting to learn and ever questioning, how could I do this in a way that could be helping lift the capacity of others, and be in more of a conscious relationship, beneficial reciprocal relationship with other life. And all that said, I think, yeah, it would be, just meeting with many people and asking, why are you here on this planet? What enabled you to be here? How can you give back to that? And try and, at minimum, how do we create beneficial ruins? Because we're creating plenty of ruin. But how, you know, one design principle I have in life is how can we design things in such a way that we can kick off tomorrow? And how can the what we did without us, with going in ruin, with starting to erode, how can it enhance things over the original condition? And I feel the only way you can do that is by collaborating with other lives.
Yeah, one thing I kind of wanted to add to that too is like why I was so attracted to what Brad was doing and why I wanted to make this film is because it's all of this process. It's really fun. It's really satisfying. It's really like empowering. Whereas, you know, it's not like a guilt trip. It's not, you don't feel like these problems are so big that there's nothing you can do. It's really the opposite. And there's like this very childlike thing about digging holes in the ground and like moving water around. You know, it's like the kind of play you do as a child by a creek. It's like very joyous. And, you know, not to say anything about then the plants that grow that you get to have a relationship with and the birds that come into the space that you're working in. And to me, that's like proof that this is the legitimate thing and that it's possible for people to start doing this like at a very large scale, because there is just something like fun and joyous about it, and it creates beauty. And like, you know, these are things that I respond to, and they're motivating. And, you know, to me, there's just like, there is something about that aspect of this that I find incredibly powerful. So, and I'm probably definitely preaching to the choir because I'm sure almost everybody on here understands what I'm talking about.
And I think that's one of the really miraculous things about water work is it's so actionable, it achieves results so quickly, it's so fun. And so it really enables these community movements to grow and spread because we can have a good time, we can play like children, we can see the results, and you know, the proof is in the results. And so that really enables these things to spread from region to region and place to place.
Nice.
Awesome, just really fantastic. I think let's open it up to some questions. I see one question that a number of people are asking that might be just a quick one to start out, and there's kind of two parts to this. One, is there a volume 3 about storing water coming? Some people are mentioning that it sounds like this was in the works at some point. And then also, are you open to translating into more languages? Someone mentioned that they'd be interested in translating into French. Another person asking if you might have a Swahili version, or they might be able to facilitate the translation. So what's on the docket and how to best support you in those efforts, Brad?
So volume 3 is still in the works. And it's mostly done, but there's still a lot of work to go on it. So yeah, I am working on that still, along with other writing projects. So there's just I've just got too much on my plate, but it is still slowly moving forward. The Spanish edition, as I mentioned earlier, should be out later this year. Keep checking back on my website for updates on that, at harvestingrainwater.com. And also we'll have a Spanish website. It's not up yet, but it'll be cosecha de agua de lluvia.com. Right now it just links to my English site. There is a Turkish edition in the works. There's the department of the Turkish government is actually working on that at the moment. The first edition of my book was translated into Arabic by a Jordanian publisher. If you search Arabic edition on my website, I link to that. I don't know if it's in print any longer. I have not had success in getting a response from the publisher. I wanted to see if the publisher would be up for republishing the new revised edition. And at the time that happened because the US State Department had a program where they would try and get Arabic speaking publishers to translate and publish Arabic editions of 10 to 15 books a year of US authors. So I lucked out in that that it went through that program. So in terms of how to get other editions in other languages. So ideally what I would like to see is if you can contact publishers of the language you want to see the book in, and put them in touch with me. I'd love to sell them the rights for that edition, and I can provide them with the files from the book once we've got the contract for securing the rights. That's my preferred way of going at this point, because that there's much lower risk of pirating of the material, which to be honest is one reason why volume 3 isn't out. Yeah, the pirating of the books really has hurt me in the past, and knocked me back significantly financially. So and just sucked my will. So I'd rather do stuff that's in a more reciprocal manner. But I would love to see it in an edition in every language in the world. Ideally with forwards and afterwards and other stuff of the work of people of that language, you know, what they're doing locally. So it's not just coming from me or, you know, and the people I learn from. It's like, look to what's going on where you are. I'm sure you can find some great stuff. We need more cross-pollination, and thus we need more diversity of and density of authors and storytellers, because then you get better cross-pollination.
I think that'd be a really good strategy for someone who's like, what, how do I start? What do I make? It's like, you can do a film screening about this. And if you know someone who's like create a rain garden, maybe a day later, you could take them there, like do like a community workshop event or build a rain garden. Show a film first and then do that. It'd be pretty cool.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the film because we're trying to. David's been working on trying to get us a version of the film with at least Spanish subtitles. It'd be great to get many more versions with subtitles in other languages, and maybe David, you can speak to that.
Yeah, we have a Spanish language version coming out in April at the latest. I can definitely share it with the Water Stories community when that happens. And yeah, it'd be awesome to have languages, other languages. I mean, it's really easy on YouTube. You just kind of upload a subtitle, like a caption file, and you can. So all I have to do is get the dialogue translated and then upload it, and that's all there is to it. And then you can go to the closed caption widget or whatever it is and click on there and choose your language. So yeah, hopefully by next month there'll be a Spanish version as well, but it'd be cool at some point to be able to click on that and see 10 or 20 different languages.
Yeah, made this spread far and wide and into the homes and minds of people all around the world.
Yeah. All right.
So
good question.
Yeah, have you picked out any, Raleigh? We can kind of alternate picking a question maybe.
Yeah, and again, reminding anybody, like we probably can't take too many live questions because we got a lot. We have like 250 people that showed up and many asked questions, but we can take a few. Like I feel like one live question would be good, but let's answer a few of these. Let's find a good one. So I think Brad talked about in a rainy context with his poop story about the Puget Sound, like what can be done in extreme, in areas with lots of rain, that could work too. Oh, here we go. Okay, this is pretty good about maintenance. This is from Calissa. What has your experience with maintenance of these systems? I worked on rainwater catchment, and it's usually a challenge due to lack of finances. And to keep it going, have you discovered any particular design practices that reduce maintenance needs?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because I thought my neighbor was texting me, so I got distracted.
Oh, no worries. Okay, so it's about maintenance. What has been your experience with maintaining these systems? She's had a lot of challenges maintaining them by the city. Have you discovered any particular design practices that reduce maintenance needs?
Okay, so when we're in the built environment, there's always going to be maintenance needs. But we're able to minimize maintenance by choosing the right plants and the right microclimate, so they're much easier for them to succeed. But in the urban context, we have to keep plants pruned so they don't block public pathways or grow into the driving lanes. So to address that, well, for many years, there was no support from the city. In fact, just because they did not have the resources for it. In fact, city hired crews were the biggest threat to our installations, because they would answer say a litter call. There might be litter in one of these, or there had been a fallen branch. They went to address that, and then they would just clear cut everything, wipe it out, or they'd herbicide everything, because their crews were not trained in plant identifications. They couldn't tell the difference between a weed or a wildflower, or apparently a tree. Thankfully, that's recently changed. The city of Tucson now has a storm to shade program, which is a green infrastructure program. It just got funding secured at the end of last year. And so they're now training and hiring crews that have specific knowledge around how to more properly maintain these systems. So that's a huge plus. But they recognize that they don't have anywhere near the resources to address the full need in the city. So to fill that gap, and preceding that storm to shade program, we created the neighborhood foresters. So the neighborhood foresters effort is what started the rain and tree planting in our neighborhood. So back in 1996 is when we started. And so we'd plant the rain and water harvesting basins, then plant the native food-bearing trees. And now we've evolved it over the years. So we have much larger basins lower than the street to capture water from the street. And we plant the trees and understory all at the same time. And we recognized that the majority of the populace doesn't really know plants very well, let alone how to take care of them. So we have regular workshops, work parties, hands-on, bring in certified arborists to train them up and us up. And that's an ongoing thing you need to do with any of this, because the larger thing is this is cultural change work. So we need to create the media, like as David has done, as I've tried to do with my websites and stuff, as Water Stories does. But we also need to get this into our education system. We have to have continuous training, and we can't use the same training we did 10 years ago. We have to keep evolving our training as our understanding changes and as the context shifts. So you can see a lot of that maintenance stuff that we've created on neighborhoodforesters.org. You can also look up, do a search on storm to shade for how the city of Tucson is trying to address this. But I would say that there's no more maintenance with this system than any other system. It's just different maintenance. And in some ways there's less, because we never have a leak, because there's no plastic irrigation pipe that can leak. We tend to have fewer weeds than plants that are on regular irrigation, because weeds respond better to regular irrigation, whereas the perennials respond better to pulses of water from the street. Yeah, and these water harvesting basins, they clean the street, because the runoff takes the leaf drop that fell on the street and pulls it into the basin. Free nutrient and organic matter capture.
Awesome.
Fantastic. I've got 3 questions here that I think we can kind of roll into one and answer all collectively. Someone from Colorado Springs, someone from San Diego, and a third person that I didn't mention, but they're looking at, they're all working at getting curb or core cuts legal, starting with their house as a demonstration site. They've spoken with several people in the city government, and people are interested and generally supportive, but it seems like they're going in a circle and constantly talking to the next person, and they're not sure how to finally get permission. Additionally, someone else is asking for this for specifically in public right-of-way areas. The same thing, working in San Diego and getting hamstrung at every turn by the bureaucracies of the city. And then to round out the third piece here, how to introduce the idea to city councils and governments to change the toxic amendments that they advocate.
My neighbor just got here. I will answer that, but I got to run down and give him the petition.
Okay, yep.
Do it, the community activism in action. Well, yeah,
Yes.
folks, we're probably also as a time warning, not a warning, but just to let you know, we're probably gonna end this very soon. So we might have time for one or two questions. And Zach, like, you can keep going this as long as you want, but I might dip out 5 minutes if that's cool with you.
Yep. Yeah. I can continue, and I think we'll go for a maximum another 30 minutes, folks.
Okay.
There's still a lot of questions here, and I think we've. But you can see one of the answers to this question is in action right now. I think by organizing amongst yourselves and within your community, having these petitions, policy and politics always change retroactively, and they usually only change at the expressed interest of their constituents. So going to a town or a municipality as one person advocating for these things is not a very strong position, and they tend to kind of blow you off and not really give you the time of day. And so if you can instead organize as a community in your area, if you can be an entire neighborhood unified in what you're requesting in these policy changes, that gives you a lot stronger standing. So I think a lot of times we tend to focus on changing the politicians or changing the policies themselves, when changing the willpower of the people is the thing that actually results in that policy change. So it's very important to establish those connections, but it's also very important to establish the connections in your community so that you are a community united saying, we want X, Y, and Z, rather than just single people that are pretty easy to brush off.
Yeah, I feel like to piggyback on that as well, like kind of a vision or a dream I had right after I first started looking at Brad's book was that's kind of happening in Tucson, is that things are starting to reach this critical mass of like awareness of this process. And a lot of these things that Brad did that were illegal, or as he calls them, like pre-legal, are now part of like city government, and are mandatory, certain kinds of water harvesting in commercial buildings and things like that. And so there is this kind of image that I saw of like, if there's a certain point maybe in Tucson where so many people are doing this that the entire city becomes a model for other cities and other places, kind of the way Brad is talking about some of the cities in the Pacific Northwest. But with us, it's like a life or death kind of thing. There is a chance we will run out of Colorado River water, and then our aquifer has its, own issues. We've kind of already run out of groundwater at different points. And so not that I want necessarily those things to happen, but I could imagine Tucson becoming this city that becomes a model for all these cities in the Southwest, and then maybe cities all over the world. I think there's like such a power to just seeing Brad's neighborhood, probably initially just his property, then the whole neighborhood, now neighborhoods dotted all over Tucson. And to see that like on a citywide scale would be such a profound thing. I feel like at least other American cities would then have like a reference and a reference for all the legal and political ways to get that to happen. So yeah, I think just like you're saying, it kind of starts to scale up, and then there just becomes more and more power in these ideas, which are pretty self-evident once they're on display for people to see.
Awesome.
So maybe riffing off what the last part I heard you say there, David. So for those of you that are wanting to do this in your community, share David's movie. Okay, because the nice thing about that, and also share my books, especially the blue one, the starter book, because people can consume that in the privacy and safety of their own home. They're not being threatened or questioned at a public meeting. Okay, so they can start to be exposed to this, and questions will arise that they can pursue. But again, in a non-challenge, threatening environment. And then I would say some other strategies. Well, in my books, I give strategies for how you make change. For street runoff harvesting, for gray water, legalizing that statewide. Got in the volume 2 book, in the gray water chapter, got how Arizona legalized it. I did a blog post on how Utah just did. Fortunately, Utah's legalization is not as good as Arizona's, but it's a great start. And give you all that info and links. But you want to find allies in the system. So as you're talking to various city departments, who's more receptive? And then work with them, because they know the system. And then you can strategize with them on who you contact next. In David's film, you'll see Ann Audrey interviewed. She was instrumental. She was my primary ally, along with Katie Bolger, the city council aide, getting stuff through the system. The other thing is find other voices. If it's just you, you're unlikely to be heard. So you want to create a community of voices. So, and as diverse a community as possible. So more voices, more volume, and the greater the diversity of voices, you get people of different interests on board, and then approach. And there can be, I don't know, I found sometimes some communities, an individual or an organization can kind of stand up as the leader, but maybe there's something faulty about that individual or that organization, and that the way they say things, they burn others. So don't do it in a way that you're dependent on any one person or one organization. Be fluid enough that if conflict arises, yeah, you can reform and talk to others. And as I said before, point to other communities that have done this and have succeeded, and try and find communities in similar climates. That's what I hear all over. People say, oh, you can do it there, you can't do it here. Yeah, they say that about everything. So do it here. You might have to do a pre-legal action. But do it where you're most likely to succeed and less likely to fail. We started at the top of our watershed where there is the least amount of water flowing. So there is the least chance of it being a problem. And then we just did one and then worked out the kinks before we did another. So you want to create the greatest chance of success when you start this, because this is a trust building effort. And a woman, Dora, with Flowers and Bullets here in Tucson, she's a great community activist, and she said this thing that just sticks with me. She said, yeah, we move at the speed of trust. So you really got to manage your being state. You got to don't be a jerk. Be good with people. Listen to them. Try and really answer their questions. Because if you're a jerk, you're going backwards. You're not building any trust. And so when a city person or whomever, an engineer, brings up a question or says no, that's not the end of the conversation. That's the beginning of the conversation. You say, okay, no, why, what is it you're saying no to? What are your concerns here? How could we address those concerns? Or you start proposing stuff that addresses those concerns. Yeah, that's all essential stuff. And I'll just say that the other rah thing of starting at home or on your neighborhood block is when we were trying to change gray water laws and get gray water harvesting legalized, especially low cost gravity fed systems, met huge resistance. And because at the table, all these plumbing engineers and stuff said that you can't do that. You have to do it with tanks and pumps and all this stuff. And like, why do you have to do that? And they said, because that's what it says in the book. And I said, well, the book didn't capture it all. And when I asked him, I said, look, have you done these systems? And they go, no, I've never done it. Well, I have done these other systems and they work. Come see it. Come see it. I want to show you how this works. So working examples, working thriving examples are a great way to shift people, because then it's not word of mouth. It's not one person's word and another they can see for themselves. And they're likely going to see things that you missed and point out. Might tick you off at first, but get over that, because they're telling you something that you need to address. So work on that, evolve it, and then it'll work better for everyone in the long run.
Very similar to the Regendra story. You just started with a shovel by hand, and then eventually the whole community hopped in. It's the same story that takes place all over. It's beautiful seeing, Brad, what happened to you. It's so inspiring. It's so cool. All right.
Well, again, I want to say, I tell the story how a village in Rajasthan, India, shifted the lives and practices of villagers all around them. That's the first story in volume 2. I show you how the state of Arizona changed its gray water laws, became the first in the nation to legalize gravity-fed, simple, inexpensive gray water systems with no inspection, no permit, no fee. It's all automatic as long as you follow common sense guidelines. That whole story is in the gray water chapter, volume 2. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, one thing I want to share.
Just fantastic. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Zach, one thing I want to share for folks who don't know, it's like we post all of these replays and all the films on the Water Stories community. So if you want to have discussions about your context or see all these water projects and films about water cycle restoration, they're all on the Water Stories community, and we'll repost the link. But you know, the Water Harvester film is there along with the discussion about it, along with some of Brad's other work. We have other films we've done, you know, award-winning films. Just, you know, we had a film about Rajendra Singh just at the Boulder Environmental Film Festival. It's won 6 awards. It's been really fun talking with people at these festivals about it. And we're going to release a film about Sepp Holzer that we've been building for months and months. But also too, here you can share about your projects, your context, and get kind of advice about what you're dealing with. Like, you know, you might be dealing with context in a really harsh climate on different landscapes, but people from all around the world will chime in and give you advice and really just have helpful discussion about all these things. So I advise you, if you're getting into this and want to just talk with people, want continued inspiration and education, you can hop into the Water Stories community, and it's a great way to really learn about this and continue these conversations so you can start having action. And yeah, that's why I wanted to chime in really quick about. And so I'm going to post a link, but I'm getting blasted by my family. Come upstairs, there's dinner. So I have to get going in a bit. But Brad, David, Zach, thank you so much for having me on and sharing all your amazing work. This is so cool. You know, we had almost 300 people show up live to this. This is so amazing to see that people are interested and want to do something, because I think this will really snowball into something big.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having us, and for everyone who joined. And yeah, just really happy to know about this community and really impressed by all the work that you're doing.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's been really an honor and pleasure to have you guys on here. You know, we find that it's so important to just knit these stories and knit this web together. And I know you guys are doing a great job of that in your local communities, and We're going to do everything we can to support and grow these movements so that we can all move towards abundance, move towards a happier, healthier life all together. David and Brad, do you guys want to wrap up here? Do you want to do one more or two more questions, or just go into some closing thoughts? How are you feeling? We're pretty deep into it now, so want to be respectful of your guys' time, and I'm sure you have
I
other
should probably
commitments
run
today as
too.
well.
I think I need to run. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and so my family probably needs a little backup in a minute here.
Yeah, I gotta run off to dance class. A whole nother kind of
Awesome.
flow.
Do you guys want to share any closing thoughts, any closing words?
So I'll just throw this out. It's a question that oftentimes comes up, though I didn't see this one in particular in the chat. Well, two quick things. One person said, hey, we're in a cold climate where people salt the roads. So just why don't you start in a lower traffic road that might have less salt applied, and plant salt tolerant vegetation in those rain garden zones. But a lot of times people are worried, hey, if you're pulling water off the street, are you reducing water for those downstream? No. So we're doing this in a way that is making more water available for more over the long term. So yes, we are reducing the spike flood flow of runoff, but doing it in a way that increases the subsurface flow in the dry season. Okay. And I also want to let folks know that on my website, harvestingrainwater.com, I have whole sections on all harvest of all kinds of different waters: rainwater, stormwater, street runoff, air conditioning, condensate, dew, gray water, and so forth. So there's a ton of info on there. So just dive in. And the neighborhoodforesters.org as well. Yeah. So thanks for your interest, and keep pursuing your interest, and don't just read and watch, do as well, because that's great learning. Don't worry about screwing up, just start small, and just try and fix your mistakes. That's how you learn.
Yeah, just to close on that thought, one of my favorite quotes is from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, that knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. And I think you've done such an incredible job of applying and doing, of inspiring so many people. I cannot recommend Brad's books highly enough. They're the go-to resource for all things harvesting rainwater. If you haven't gotten them, get them, check them out. You will not regret it. In my opinion, everything this man is doing is wonderful. Support him, help make this a movement that really spreads around the world so that we can all move towards a better common future. So thank you, Brad. Thank you, David, for everything you do, for this wonderful film, for joining us here today. Thank you, everyone who joined us live. Thanks to everyone who watches the replay. And get out there, play in the rain, make some holes, mess around, and learn from nature so that we can work with nature to make a better common future.
Right on.
Thank you, everybody.